Welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is part 2 of the games that didn't sell well. Hopefully you've already checked out part 1. If not, no worries. I've dropped the link in the description, so you can watch it anytime. Alright, let's not waste any more time and jump straight into the video.
What the fuck you doing, huh? Wait!
Sleeping Dog is one of the games I've used the most in videos so far, and surprisingly, I had to include it in this video as well. You might not know this, but the game was originally supposed to be called True Crime Hong Kong. However, back in 2011, Activision decided to cancel it, thinking it wouldn't be able to compete with other games in the market. Luckily, Square Enix saw the potential in the game and decided to acquire the rights. They rebranded it as Sleeping Dogs, and the rest, as they say, is history. When the game was finally released, critics were blown away by its unique take on the open world formula. They loved the martial arts combat and the gripping story, and many even compared it to the popular Grand Theft Auto series. Despite all the praise, Sleeping Dogs didn't quite do as well as expected in terms of sales. In its first month in the US, it only sold 172,000 copies, which was disappointing. By November 2012, Square Enix had shipped 1.5 million copies worldwide, but they still thought the sales were slow. As of 2025, the game has sold around 2.3 million copies, which is still a respectable number. The thing is, Square Enix had really high hopes for the game, and they later admitted that their sales targets were a bit too ambitious. But over time, the game started to gain traction and became profitable, thanks to its dedicated fan base and long-term sales. In fact, even a year after its release, the game still had around 500,000 monthly players, which is pretty impressive. The Evil Within 2 definitely wasn't a complete failure, but it didn't perform as well as its publisher Bethesda or developer Tango Gameworks had hoped. Despite being a solid game, it ended up being a bit of a commercial letdown. Released back in 2017 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC, this survival horror game had all the ingredients to be a huge success. It was the sequel to the 2014 original, and it came from the legendary Shinji Okami, the mastermind behind Resident Evil. The game's visuals were downright eerie and detailed, and the sound design was chilling, just what you want from a horror game. It also offered a great challenge for fans of the genre, and critics loved it, giving it scores of around 80 on Metacritic. They praised its atmosphere, scares, and how it balanced horror with a personal story. When it comes to sales, it's a bit tricky to get exact numbers since Bethesda didn't release them, but estimates suggest it sold less than 500,000 copies in its first few months. For a big budget horror game from a major publisher, that's on the low side, especially considering the first game sold over 1 million copies despite its imperfections. Bethesda probably expected the sequel to at least match or surpass that, but it didn't quite make it. There were even rumors that the lower sales might have affected Tango Gameworks' reputation. Luckily, the studio bounced back with Hi-Fi Rush, so they're still doing just fine.
Not this time.
Sunset Overdrive is one of those games that was bursting with fun and excitement, but unfortunately didn't sell as well as it should have. Developed by the amazing folks at Insomniac Games, this game was released back in 2014 for Xbox One and later made its way to PC in 2018. With its unique blend of action, adventure, and humor, Sunset Overdrive received rave reviews from critics and players alike, but despite its awesomeness, the game didn't quite live up to its sales expectations. According to some leaked financial reports, the game sold around 1.9 million copies across all platforms. While that might seem like a decent number, it's not quite enough when you consider that the game cost a hefty $42.6 million to make. Even though it brought in $49.7 million in revenue, Insomniac's profit was only around $567, which is pretty low for a game of that scale. So, what went wrong? Well, for starters, Sunset Overdrive was an Xbox One exclusive when it first launched, which meant that it was only available to a smaller group of players. Plus, it came out during a really busy time for games, which made it harder for it to stand out from the crowd. Despite these challenges, Sunset Overdrive has managed to build a loyal fan base over time. Thanks to being added to Xbox Game Pass, more players have had the chance to check it out, and it's kept the game alive and beloved by those who discovered its over-the-top action.
Okay, guys, now what?
Gravity Rush 2 is one of those games that just didn't get the attention it deserved. While it wasn't a complete flop, it definitely didn't perform as well as Sony probably hoped. In Japan, Gravity Rush 2 sold around 102,630 units by February 2017, which unfortunately wasn't enough to make a big splash. And although Sony never shared the global sales figures, it's likely that the game didn't quite meet their expectations. Despite the sales, Gravity Rush 2 got some fantastic reviews from critics. It scored an impressive 80 on Metacritic with praise for its engaging story, improved gameplay, and stunning visuals. But the game was released during a pretty busy time with lots of other big-name titles competing for attention. That probably made it tough for Gravity Rush 2 to stand out and attract a big audience. The game also had some cool online features like sharing photos, sending challenges, and competing on leaderboards. But unfortunately, Sony shut down the servers less than 2 years after the game's release. This usually happens when a game doesn't have a strong enough community to keep the online features going. It's not the end of the world, but it's a shame that Gravity Rush 2 didn't quite build the loyal following it deserved. Okami wasn't a complete flop, but it definitely didn't sell as well as it should have. When it first came out, critics absolutely adored it. The game scored an impressive 93 on Metacritic for the PS2 and racked up awards left and right, including IGN's Best Artistic Design and Most Innovative Design in 2006. But sadly, it only managed to sell around 200,000 copies worldwide in its first year. So, what went wrong? Well, for starters, Okami was released towards the end of the PS2's life cycle, just as the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were starting to take over the gaming scene. Many gamers had already moved on to the newer consoles, and Okami got lost in the transition. Additionally, Capcom didn't give it the marketing push it deserved, and its unique art style and slower pace might have confused or put off some players who were expecting something more fast-paced and mainstream. The underwhelming performance of Okami even led to the closure of Clover Studio, the talented team behind the game, in 2007. Luckily, over the years, Okami got a second chance with ports to the Wii, PS3, and even an HD remaster in 2017 for modern consoles. These releases helped the game reach more players, and it has now sold over 1 million copies across all versions. But back in 2006, it was a hidden gem that just didn't get the recognition it deserved right away. You might remember Prey, the awesome first-person sci-fi game that came out back in 2017. Developed by the talented folks at Arcane Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks, it received a ton of praise for its unique gameplay. But despite the amazing reviews, it didn't quite live up to sales expectations. So, what happened? Well, let's dive into some numbers. In its first week, Prey sold around 180,000 copies on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in Western markets, which is a decent start. On PC, it reached about 250,000 copies in its first month, which isn't bad either. However, for a big Bethesda release, these numbers were a bit disappointing. There were a few reasons why Prey didn't quite take off as expected. One reason was that Bethesda decided not to send out early review copies, which meant that the game's pre-launch excitement was a bit muted. Many players decided to wait and see what others thought of the game before buying it themselves. Another issue was the game's name, Prey. Some people got confused and thought it was connected to an older game with the same title, which it wasn't. This left some folks unsure about what they were getting, and it might have deterred some potential buyers. Lastly, the game's genre might have played a role in its lower sales. Prey is an immersive sim, a type of game that's super engaging but tends to appeal more to hardcore gamers rather than a mainstream audience. While this genre has its loyal fans, it might not be as widely appealing as other types of games. Despite all this, Prey is an excellent game that's definitely worth checking out. If you haven't played it yet, give it a try and see what you think. Released in 1999 for the Sega Dreamcast, Shenmue was one of the most expensive games ever made with a production budget of around $47 million. Some even say it was closer to $70 million if you include marketing and the early work put into its sequel, Shenmue 2. Sega had big plans for the game, hoping it would sell millions of copies and help boost the struggling Dreamcast console. They envisioned a saga spanning 4 or 5 games, and the first one was supposed to kick it all off. Critics loved Shenmue for how ambitious it was, how detailed the world felt, and how real it seemed. It built a passionate fan base with people praising the game's unique qualities. But even with all the praise, it didn't sell enough to cover its huge cost. Shenmue sold about 1.2 million copies worldwide, which is good, but not enough for a game that expensive. To break even, it needed to sell around 2 to 3 million copies. This issue continued with Shenmue 2, which came out in 2001. By that point, Dreamcast sales were plummeting, especially in North America. Sega decided to release an enhanced version of the game on Microsoft's Xbox, but it sold even fewer copies than the first game. Sadly, this led to the cancellation of further sequels, and Sega eventually left the home console market altogether. Despite these struggles, Shenmue has developed a devoted cult following over the years. This passion led to a successful crowdfunding campaign for Shenmue 3 in 2015, raising over $7 million to continue the story. However, even with years of anticipation, Shenmue 3, released in 2019, didn't meet its sales expectations either. While Shenmue didn't achieve the commercial success it deserved, its legacy lives on in the hearts of its fans and its influence on the gaming world.
Shall I take them all on?
The wonderful 101 wasn't exactly a disaster, but it definitely didn't hit the mark commercially, especially when you consider the high hopes for it. Released in 2013 for the Nintendo Wii U, the game was developed by Platinum Games, known for its high-energy action titles, and published by Nintendo. It's an action-packed game where you control a team of 100 tiny superheroes as they team up to fight off alien invaders. The unique twist is that you use the Wii U gamepad to draw shapes that turn your heroes into powerful weapons like giant fists or swords. Unfortunately, the wonderful 101 struggled to find its footing in terms of sales. The Wii U itself was already facing a tough time with only around 13 million units sold, compared to the massive success of the Wii. The game's launch coincided with a period when the Wii U was already losing steam, and it didn't do much to turn things around. In its first month in Japan, the game sold fewer than 30,000 copies, and global sales barely cracked 100,000 in its early run. These numbers were disappointing, especially considering the game was backed by Nintendo and developed by a respected studio. However, the wonderful 101 got a second chance in 2020 when a remastered version was released for the Switch, PS4, and PC, funded via Kickstarter. This time around, the game sold over 100,000 copies, doing better thanks to a bigger audience and a cult following. Enslaved Odyssey to the West is often regarded as a commercial flop despite its critical acclaim. Developed by the talented team at Ninja Theory and published by Namco Bandai Games, this action-adventure game was released back in 2010 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, and later made its way to Windows. Despite receiving amazing reviews from critics, Enslaved struggled to find its footing in the market. Namco Bandai had high hopes, expecting to sell over 1 million copies, but unfortunately it only managed to sell around 460,000 units by February 2011. By September of that year, sales had increased to 730,000 units, but it was still a far cry from what the developers had hoped for. So, what went wrong? Well, the game was released during a super busy time with lots of other big titles vying for attention. This made it tough for Enslaved to stand out and get the visibility it deserved. The marketing efforts also didn't quite hit the mark, and some players felt that the game's quality suffered because of the compromises made to develop it for multiple platforms. For example, some players experienced technical glitches that detracted from the overall experience. Despite all this, Enslaved has developed a loyal following over the years and is now considered a cult classic. Players love its engaging storyline, beautiful graphics, and ambitious artistic vision. Unfortunately, due to poor sales, a planned sequel was canceled, which is a shame because we would have loved to see where the story went next. Alien Isolation is one of those games that didn't exactly flop, but it didn't reach the huge sales numbers its publisher Sega had hoped for either. Released in October 2014, this survival horror game was critically acclaimed, but it didn't meet the lofty commercial goals set by Sega. It has since developed a loyal fan base and even earned the title of a cult classic, but let's take a look at why it didn't hit the big numbers Sega expected. Developed by Creative Assembly, a studio known for its strategy games like Total War, Alien Isolation was a departure from their usual style. The game was slow, tense, and all about stealth, with an atmosphere that oozed tension. Sega spent a reported $40 to $50 million on development and marketing, hoping to sell 2 to 3 million copies. But by early 2015, the game had sold about 1 million copies, and while it did eventually reach around 2.1 million by mid-2015, including digital sales, it was a slower burn than Sega had expected. Today, total sales are estimated to be around 2.5 to 3 million, which for a horror game isn't bad at all, but it wasn't the huge hit Sega was hoping for, especially for a high-profile Alien title. The Alien franchise was also in a weird place at the time. After the lukewarm reception of Prometheus in 2012 and the infamous failure of Colonial Marines in 2013, the brand wasn't as hot as it once was. That meant Alien Isolation didn't have the same level of built-in excitement. Sega did report that the game broke even and turned a modest profit, especially with the boost from digital sales and discounts over time, but unfortunately, it didn't reach the blockbuster numbers they had envisioned. That's it for today's list of huge games that just didn't sell as well as we thought they would. It's crazy to think how some of these amazing titles didn't get the attention they deserved, right? Even though they didn't hit the big sales numbers, many of them still have strong fan bases and are remembered as great games. If you've played any of these games, or if there are others you think should have made the list, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe for more awesome content on underrated games. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.